Okay, so what if humanity had a blueprint for its own evolution? I mean, a real guide to help us navigate the massive challenges we all face and, build a future where every single generation can flourish more than the last. Today, we're going to explore a really powerful framework that suggests just that, and it uses a metaphor that's as old as navigation itself. All right, let's dive in. But before we get into it, we have to ask ourselves a pretty fundamental question. With all our incredible technological progress, are we actually heading in the right direction? Are we building a world that's not just smarter, but wiser? Not just more powerful, but, more compassionate? This question is really at the heart of the entire blueprint we're about to unpack. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We'll start by looking at why it feels like we're a world adrift. Then we'll introduce the solution, the love compass. After that, we'll explore its 4 key directions, check out the dangers we need to avoid, and finally, we'll chart a course toward what's called a legacy of flourishing. So let's start at the beginning. This idea of a world adrift. The core concept here is that our society is running on a generational deficit. And we're not talking about money. We're talking about a deficit of 2 absolutely fundamental human needs: genuine love and effective discipline. And look, this isn't about blaming anyone. It's about recognizing a pattern that has really, really deep roots. And these symptoms you see here, they're not just isolated issues. They are all connected to this core deficit. The source material calls it a lack of relational nourishment. It's like, just as your body needs food, our minds and our spirits need supportive relationships to truly thrive. And when we don't get them, the consequences show up everywhere, not just as anxiety or depression, but as real physical stress on our bodies and a complete breakdown of trust in our communities. This slide really lays out the 2 paths in front of us. On one side, you have the cycle that so many people are stuck in: intergenerational trauma. The harm, the emotional struggles from one generation, they get unintentionally passed to the next, often because of that lack of love and guidance. It just becomes this self-perpetuating loop. But on the other side, you see the alternative, a virtuous cycle. This is where the compounding benefits of love and real, effective discipline build resilience, empathy, and strength, creating this positive inheritance for the next generation. The whole goal of this blueprint is to consciously break that loop on the left and start building the one on the right. So, if we're adrift, how in the world do we find our way? Well, this brings us to the central metaphor of our whole explainer, the love compass. Think of it as a tool designed to help us find our true north and navigate the really complex journey of human evolution. This single quote, this is the core thesis for the entire framework. It's basically saying that love isn't just a feeling, an emotion, or something that's nice to have. It is the fundamental, non-negotiable guiding principle. It's the one constant we can always orient ourselves by, no matter how choppy the seas get. And look, this isn't just some lofty philosophical idea. It's designed as a practical framework. The love compass suggests that every major force that shapes our society, our wisdom and knowledge, our systems of power, our pursuit of justice, all of it has to be anchored to and constantly checked against the true north of love. If any one of those things drifts away from that anchor, we all lose our way. Simple as that. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty and explore the 4 directions. This is where the blueprint gets really practical, assigning a core human value to each of the cardinal points of the compass. These are the tools we can use to actively chart our course forward. First up, of course, is north, love. As we said, it's our constant. But the source material defines it in a very specific way. It's not just romantic or familial emotion, it's a biological imperative. Seriously, evolutionarily, love is the software that ensures pair bonding and the super long-term care that human babies need. It's the engine that drives nurturing, protection, and the passing down of culture. Things like oxytocin and dopamine are the hardware, but love is the operating system for human survival and connection. Okay, heading east, we have wisdom. Think of the sun rising in the east, right? It brings light and clarity. Well, wisdom here isn't just about cramming your head full of facts or data. It's about the discerning application of knowledge. And what's the filter for that discernment? You guessed it, love. I mean, knowledge without love can be cold, even dangerous. But when that knowledge is guided by compassion and a genuine desire for everyone's well-being, that's when it becomes true wisdom. And here's what that actually looks like in the real world. Wisdom in action means reframing discipline not as punishment, but as a loving act of guidance. It means designing our education systems not just to prepare kids for jobs, but to prepare them to create a sustainable future. It's about fostering critical thinking from a young age, And maybe most importantly, seeing learning not as something that just ends with school, but as a lifelong project of growth for all of us. Next, we turn to the South, power. Now, power often gets a bad rap, seen as this corrupting force. But this framework argues it's actually neutral. It's just energy. The crucial question is, how is it directed? When power is totally detached from love, yeah, it leads to dominance and control. But when it's aligned with our true north, power becomes the engine for incredible positive change, a force for collective progress and well-being. And here is what love-directed power looks like in policy. Investing in early childhood development isn't just a nice thing to do. It is one of the most powerful, high-return investments a society can possibly make. The source highlights a potential return of up to $17 for every single dollar invested. Now that is power, guided by love for our youngest generation, creating tangible, measurable good for every single one of us. Finally, in the West, we find justice. So, if wisdom is the insight and power is the engine, then justice is the ethical framework that makes sure the journey is fair for everyone on board. When it's guided by love, justice isn't just about punishing wrongs. It's about proactively creating a society that upholds the dignity of every individual, that corrects systemic imbalances, and that prevents harm before it even happens. This number is just staggering, and it really highlights why love-guided justice is so urgent. Almost half of the world's children under 5 are at risk of not reaching their full potential simply because of the circumstances they were born into. Justice, in this framework, demands that we address this. It says early childhood interventions aren't just a powerful investment, they are a moral imperative, a fundamental act of fairness. Of course, no journey is without its dangers. The love compass doesn't just show us where to go, it also warns us about the treacherous territories we absolutely have to avoid. These are the pitfalls that show up when we lose our connection to true north. So we see two major dangers here. In the Southeast, kind of a distortion between power and wisdom, we find tyranny. This is what happens when power is completely unmoored from love. It leads to systems of dominance and control. The source warns about dystopian futures where human flourishing is just sacrificed for cold efficiency. Then, in the Southwest, a distortion between power and justice, we find wrath. This is the destructive fallout from the absence of love. It shows up as those endless cycles of conflict, trauma, and suffering that we see when compassion and guidance are totally missing. So after navigating the directions and understanding the dangers, how do we actually make landfall? How do we move from this powerful metaphor to a tangible reality? This final section is all about building a legacy of flourishing. The blueprint lays out several really clear, actionable steps. First, as we've seen, we have to invest in early childhood development. It is the highest leverage point for change, period. Second, we need to embrace transformational education, teaching not just facts, but critical thinking, collaboration, and sustainability. And third, we must actively uphold universal values like truth, peace, nonviolence, and respect. These aren't just abstract ideals. They are the essential bedrock for a cohesive, functioning global society. Ultimately, this is the destination. The goal isn't some perfect, impossible utopia. It's a commitment to a positive trajectory. It's about creating a legacy where we ensure that life for our children and their children is always better, richer, and more full of opportunity than our own. It's about turning mere survival into a purposeful, meaningful journey for all of humanity. And so we end right where we began, with a question. It's a question that this entire blueprint asks us to consider in every decision we make, from our personal lives all the way up to our global policies. In a world of complex data, competing ideologies, and constant change, what if the simplest, most powerful navigational tool has been with us all along? What if our only true compass was love?